Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Want to welcome back to the program Andy Kroll. He is an investigative reporter at ProPublica. And Andy, you've been on the Russ Vought beat for a while. And this is, I feel like over the past year, I think we even spoke in the run up to the inauguration. And he has done everything, I think, on some level that I know that you had predicted or had talked about, and we had been talking about here. And you did a deep dive into this guy, and really you've pegged him as the shadow president. It really does feel like between him and Stephen Miller, that's the entire agenda. But let's start with this. What I found really interesting in your piece, or at least one of the things, aside from sort of like the disturbing origins of Russ Vought, was that he was a lot more happy about Doge than I think, certainly at the time that I had assumed he was. But before we get there, give us the background of Russ Vought, because I also learned through your piece that he's a lot more of a cultural warrior than I think I had anticipated based upon his role in the office budget management.
Yeah, it's great to be back as always. This was actually kind of a revelation for me as well. He, I think, even more than Stephen Miller, merges the sort of fiscal hawk, slash and burn, Doge-esque policy stuff on one side, and then the kind of MAGA culture warrior, Christian nationalist approach, vision, ethos as well, in a way that not a lot of people do. The cultural religious stuff we trace all the way back to the beginning, like the literal beginning. His family upbringing, his mom in particular was founding Christian schools and was speaking to the press. We're going back into like the 80s here, talking about the importance of like teaching biblical principles in public education, talking about how if the country moves away from, what she described as these Judeo-Christian values, principles, whatever, teachings, that the country is going to descend into disease, anarchy, sin. It's a really dystopic view. So you have that piece that, again, the foundation for him seems to be laid very early. Like we're talking when he was a kid. And then you have the shrink the government down to size, slash government programs, cut up the social safety net. And I think that foundation is laid when he's working on Capitol Hill as a young staffer all the way up to a senior advisor. And he really sort of develops this expertise in how the government works, where the money goes, how it flows, and how you could cut it off if you had the power to.
I was struck by one moment in the piece where they have come to him and said, people are going to die if you cut USAID. And he said, well, you could say that about any program that we have, which, okay, that may be true, but it sort of misses the point. What is the relationship between that Christian nationalism, and he's an avowed Christian nationalist, that Christian nationalism and the idea that we should strip the government of virtually all of its functions?
It's probably the first thing I would have asked him if he would have said yes to any of the like 5 interview requests that I put in over the course of months, most of this year so far. How do you square your religious worldview, the teachings that come with that, with this desire to slash programs that in a lot of cases you can measure? People have measured less funding means greater harms. In some cases, less funding means people will die at a higher rate. I think reading into what he believes, what he says, what he's written, which I did a lot of in this piece. The piece draws on, dozens of hours of previously unpublished, new speeches that he'd given, briefings that he had led, a lot of behind the scenes stuff that no one has heard or seen before. And the way he seems to frame it is that the government, in his view, has gotten to this post-constitutional, corrupted, rotten place. It has completely gone off the rails from what the founders intended, and that if people like him don't go in and take these drastic measures, firing tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of federal workers, freezing government programs unilaterally, slashing funding that in some cases could lead to greater fatalities, that America as a country will collapse. He said going into the 2024 election, we quote him as saying this, that, that election, 2024 shouldn't be thought of as like on a scale of 1980 or some more contemporary contest. It should be thought of as like 1864. It should be thought of as this is the election that we have to win, we conservatives, MAGA, etc., or else the American experiment explodes, collapses, the country is lost. So I guess if you look at these questions of why would you want to cut Medicaid, which is so clearly beneficial to low-income families around the country, undoubtedly will lead to poorer outcomes, including death. He would say that cutting these programs, shrinking the size of government, is what his side has to do to try to save America in the way that they believe America should exist. That's the best answer I have without asking him directly.
Right. Well, I hate to put you in the position of him again, but how do you think that he reconciles this idea of impoundment, which is what he's doing, or rescission, which is what he's doing, and the opposite? I can't remember what the term is for it, where you actually sort of redirect funds that have not been appropriated by Congress. Mm-hmm. How does he reconcile that with the Constitution?
Another very good question. Though this one, again, there is a pretty voluminous record of his views on why he thinks the president has these powers. And let's be clear. Article 1 of the Constitution, power of the purse, belongs to Congress. Congress writes the laws, appropriates the money. Article 2 says the executive, the president, must, quote unquote, take care to faithfully implement the laws that Congress has passed as Congress has passed them. In the way that that has been interpreted for a very long time, the way that most legal scholars, including the late conservative Justice Antonin Scalia, have interpreted the Constitution this way, is that the president doesn't have the ability to say, well, I don't agree with this law that Congress passed. I don't agree with the funding to support it, so I'm just going to freeze it. I'm just going to hold it back because it doesn't align with my vision. That is not how checks and balances, separation of powers has worked in this country. However, Russ Vought has articulated on many occasions that he believes the president the executive has much greater power than it is currently operating with, that the president does have the essentially unilateral authority to say, I think this money is wasteful. I think this money is woke. I think this money is going toward programs that shouldn't exist. I am going to pause them. I'm going to redirect them, or use these sort of budgetary gimmicks like the quote unquote pocket rescission to essentially zero out the money and prevent it from being spent. And, this is a very contested theory. And I think what he wants is to have
contested theory.
Yeah.
We have the 74 Impoundment Act as statutory authority. We have had multiple, I think, not only have we had Supreme Court cases that have enforced the Impoundment Act. I think it was New York City v. Train. But we've also had the Supreme Court rule that line item vetoes, which is essentially a rescission, right? Where the president says, okay, well, I'm taking this out of the budget. I don't believe in it, is also unconstitutional. To me, there's no controversy about this. It's only controversial in the sense that he's decided that he can do it and there's nobody stopping him. And there doesn't seem to be a mechanism in which to stop him, because we now have a Supreme Court that essentially says, well, there may be problems with this, but nobody has a toehold in which to bring a case. Let's go back a little bit. In his first term, he essentially sort of pilot programmed this with Ukraine aid.
Correct.
What I found sort of striking was when Hillary Clinton lost, there was a lot of people who were in the think tank world, the bureaucratic world, who were like, ugh, all our projects are out the window and I'm going to move on in some other way. When he loses in 2020 and gets booted out and is not able to sort of fully realize his, Christian nationalist merged with a supreme leader, which maybe isn't too different, distinct from each other, sort of world vision. He doesn't go like, bummer, I'm never going to have another Donald Trump again. I wouldn't have bet my career in 2020 after Biden wins that I'm going to get another bite at this apple. But he went immediately off and just started sort of like getting prepared to bite at this apple again. Is that just a function of like, there's so much money with the Heritage Foundation that a guy could afford to do that? Right. If it reversed and, Bernie Sanders gets in for 4 years in 2020, in 2016, and they don't get to implement their stuff, I think people would be like, okay, that's it. I got to wrap this up. Now Donald Trump's been elected and we've gone a completely different direction because there's no sort of support for a Russell Vought type, like a bureaucrat ideologue to sort of like then get on some type of sinecure.
It's a really striking moment in the arc of his career, and really one that I think helps explain a lot of why he's been so empowered and influential now. January 6th, 2021 happens, and you see an exodus of senior Trump administration folks, including people in the cabinet. We forget, like Betsy DeVos. No one's idea of like a squishy moderate says, no, this is it, I'm out, writes an op-ed and leaves. Vought does the exact opposite. He stands by Trump. He goes on to say all the same things about a stolen election and the political prisoners unjustly targeted by the Justice Department who participated in the January 6th riots. Says all that sort of stuff. But more importantly, within days of Trump leaving office, Vought launches this think tank, the Center for Renewing America, and he starts building the groundwork for a potential second Trump term. Now, when you listen to the briefings, the behind the scenes conversations that we got recordings of, you notice in like 21 and 22, there's like a little bit of a mention of like Ron DeSantis. Oh, well, Ron DeSantis. He's there too, but it's pretty obvious almost from the beginning that this is a Trump focused project and that Vought is working to keep the MAGA torch aflame and to essentially take all the lessons from Trump 1, learn those lessons, metabolize them in a certain sense to prepare for what a second Trump presidency would look like and how to avoid all that chaos, all that disorganization, all the mistakes that they made, including the whole Ukraine impoundment debacle that led to Trump's impeachment. We have Vought on tape saying that they were writing the quote unquote actual executive orders, actual regulations, and other legal authorities for a second Trump presidency, that they had drafted some 350 orders, regulations, and other documents that could be used by a future President Trump literally on day one. And of course, that's what Trump ended up doing on day one. He sat in Capital One Arena at his desk on the stage and was handed executive order after executive order and signed them all right there in front of his adoring fans. And I don't think that all of this happens if you don't have Russ Vought toiling, in his years of exile, to use his own phrase, for 4 years to prepare for that moment should Trump win again.
I want to get into sort of like, what's actually he's been doing since the beginning of the year. But one other aspect about him that sort of fascinates me or continue, we've mentioned it briefly, but the clips of him, I was really surprised about the clips of him, like sort of how virulent he was about CRT and anti-trans stuff and saying that the country's too secular. because I view him as this sort of ruthless bureaucrat. Um, and it seems like he really believes this stuff. This is not like, how does this sort of economic ideology and his sort of social ideology, how are they self-reinforcing, I guess, within the context of the conservative movement?
They're self-reinforcing in a few ways. One is this kind of talking point attack line that he helped coin, woke and weaponized. This was a project of his during those Biden years when he was out of government, where he comes up with this phrase, woke and weaponized, that gets used to tag government policies, agencies, individual, lawyers, bureaucrats who are seen as, anti-Trump or part of this larger, corrupted federal government as Vought sees it. And that is used to apply to both the budget spending side of things, but also used to apply to DEI, used to apply to trans rights, used to apply to a broader notion of religious diversity, and these, the cultural piece gets kind of wrapped into woke and weaponized in the same way that the sort of the spending, the deep state, the DOJ going after Donald Trump get lumped into that as well. So it's really interesting to see it that way. But I think that he would say, he has said, and again, in some of these recordings that we have, that the Judeo-Christian worldview part is the real foundation for him, and that the sort of budget wonk, green eye shade, spreadsheet nerd piece of it is how you start to pick apart these programs or these agencies, or go after individual government workers themselves who are opposed to or who are seen as incompatible with the Judeo-Christian worldview. I do think that's the wellspring for him. And again, the reporting in this story really helped me understand how much of that informs his worldview writ large. And when he's sort of behind the scenes talking to his own people, he really leans into the cultural and the religious stuff even more than the government program dismantler side of what he does.
Let's talk a little bit about Doge. My sense at at the time was that Doge was sort of like interfering with his plans, um, and maybe they were to a certain extent. But from your reporting, he was largely happy because it sounds like what Doge did from his perspective was go in and essentially till the land a little bit and loosen up the soil so that he could go in there and really be more surgical.
Yeah, that's a good metaphor, a good way to think about it. This was a real sort of reporting question for me from the beginning. Where does Russ Vought's project end, and where does Doge begin? How do I understand the interplay there? Again, Vought has found himself kind of partnered onto something led by a leader that is so incompatible with so much of what he believes, in the way that Donald Trump is, at least on a personal level, so different from Russ Vought. Russ Vought is a deacon at his local Baptist church. He's by no means a sort of like influencer, edgelord out there on the internet. He's certainly not like Elon Musk in so many ways. But I think there are specific instances where Doge workers kind of fall under Vought's direction, like at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, this agency born out of Elizabeth Warren's vision to protect consumers after the '08 financial crisis. And he uses Doge to brutal effect in trying to dismantle CFPB as fast as possible. There is some collaboration there with USAID between Vought, OMB, and Doge, but really it's getting to the tilling of the earth part that you mentioned. As Vought himself has said, Doge came in, these tech bros didn't know anything about government. They didn't know anything about the laws that govern how you change things in the government or not. They just kind of battering rammed their way through. And let the pieces fall wherever and let the lawsuits come. Who cares? Come at me, bro. And I think that that represented this kind of status quo smashing moment, or this paradigm shift, or however you want to describe it, in a way that I don't think Vogt maybe thought he could, or even if he thought he could, he just didn't think that that was the right strategy. But Doge showed a different path, and I think that that cleared the way for Vogt to do even more aggressive things than maybe he would have in the first place if Doge hadn't been there.
I feel like Vote in the past week or two has said like we're a month or two away from closing the Consumer Financial Protection
Right.
Bureau. Um, give me your sense of like how decimated our government is. I mean, I don't know, you know, this is a little bit outside of your specifically in the reporting of, but it's hard, I think, for people to sort of see the implications of 7/8 of the Department of Education or 7/8 of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or, you know, huge swaths of the USDA or the FDA, or, I mean, we can go on and on and on, essentially being furloughed. I mean, a lot of these people have been furloughed, never mind the government shutdown. They've been furloughed for 8 months, 7 months. Like, do you have a sense of, I mean, how would you characterize the shape of our government now and what it's going to take, if it's possible, to rebuild it to like even, I mean, you know, what the rebuilding is going to be? I mean, we're, you know, in the event that we have the opportunity for it.
It's a really good question, and one that I thought about a lot as I got really deep into this story. And actually, it came out of a conversation with a former government employee that I talked to, real smart guy who was also smart enough to leave before all this went down. But there, you know, the idea of working for the federal government as not the most remunerative or glamorous, but as steady, stable, reliable work that helps you, that lets you serve your country. The sort of concept of that, I think, has been cracked in a very big way, if not shattered. And I don't know if you can completely rebuild that, because I think the people who held that view and then saw that view smashed up are going to constantly think, well, does the next, Republican administration, to be frank, are they going to just do what Doge did or what Russ Vought did? Like, am I never safe in this job again in the way that I thought I am? So I think there's a real damage done to the idea of government service and what that entailed, and can you make a career out of that, as a lot of people in this country do. There's a really long tradition of doing that. It makes one of the things that's so great about our country. And then you have the different programmatic pieces. I wonder about, the NIH, for instance. There's been machinations there about freezing and unfreezing really vital funding that goes out to researchers who are the cutting edge medical researchers in the world. And they're in our country in large part because the NIH funds them to do work that no one else will. I don't know if those researchers feel that, wow, like everything has changed. I won't be able to do my research. But I do think they feel an insecurity now that they never had under Democrats or Republicans. And if this goes on for another 3 years and 3 months, then maybe they really do think
I'm
I'm
going to
going to another
Canada.
country.
I'm going to go to Europe. Right. I
Right.
mean,
Some already have.
Right.
Some already have.
Yeah.
But I think for some things it's too early to know how this is going to play out. Obviously, this shutdown battle, if the Obamacare subsidies are not brought back, the impact of that is very big right now, and will really have a ripple effect and put a big dent in this landmark law. But I think conceptually, psychologically, there's a lot of damage already done that will take a long time to repair, if ever. Programmatically, it's still early, and it depends on what happens over the rest of this administration.
I wanted to ask you lastly about the shutdown. Like, what do you think, based upon your reporting, Russell Vought is thinking about this shutdown? Was he excited about this, or does this in any way disrupt his plans? Because I mean, he was on a roll, and I'm curious as to your perspective on this.
I think he absolutely relished the chance to have this shutdown and probably pushed for it behind the scenes. And I wouldn't be surprised if he continued to push for remaining in the shutdown. I say that because, again, I rely on his own words. During the Biden years, in these briefings that he gave to supporters of his, he talked repeatedly about why shutdowns are valuable and important and useful to the conservative cause. At one point, he's talking with his supporters. The midterm 2022 midterms had happened, and they're talking about who the next speaker for the Republicans should be. Russ Vought, not a Kevin McCarthy fan, will not shock anyone. But anyway, he says, we need to have a speaker who has a love of the shutdowns, because the shutdowns are how we save the country. He sees these shutdowns as the ultimate brinksmanship negotiation period where you can get all the things, on the bargaining table, get the concessions that you can't get during the normal order of Congress. So that just plainly leads me to believe he's getting exactly what he wants right now. And Donald Trump has put him out front, his Grim Reaper, his Darth Vader, to use Trump's term, to lead the strategy on this shutdown.
Where does that leave him with Republican lawmakers? I mean, because it's easy for him to love the shutdown because he's not, it doesn't impact him directly.
Based on all the conversations I've had, the reporting I've done, his relationship with congressional Republicans is poor, to say the least. They don't like him outside of shutdowns saying, I'm freezing this funding, I'm trying this pocket rescission. I mean, he's trampling on their fundamental Article 1 authority, the number one job that Congress has. He's essentially saying, I'm going to step all over it. I'm going to get in the way of it. I don't care. I'm sick of dealing with Republicans. So I think that they are generally not pleased with how the White House and the OMB has treated Congress. And I think that this shutdown is just another moment where congressional Republicans have essentially thrown up their hands and said, Democrats, you got a problem? Go talk to Russ Vought. Go talk to the White House. They've essentially cut themselves out of this whole thing in a really remarkable way we haven't seen before.
Yeah, I think it's remarkable too, because the Democrats aren't necessarily they're not preventing them from cutting themselves out of this equation, which I think from a political standpoint, this is the pressure that you put them. Russ Vought is a rock, and their voters are a hard place, and that's where the Democrats got to put them. Andy Kroll, a really interesting, in-depth reporting. Really appreciate you coming on and talking about it. We'll put a link to this piece in the podcast and YouTube description.
Thanks for having me, as always.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.